Friends, and welcome to another edition of Marriage Encounter. We're delighted that you have joined us today. We are excited about what we're going to be presenting. We're not excited about conflict, although we're talking about conflict, but we're excited to be able to inform you of things you can watch out for. In other words, if you are going down a road that leads to a precipice and there's no sign that tells you that, then you are in danger. But if we can present a sign to say, hey, listen, danger ahead, then that becomes a meaningful thing. So in context, we are talking about conflict, but we're talking about what you can avoid so that you can create a meaningful relationship with your spouse. Dr. Braithwaite, good day.
Yeah, good day, friends. Excited, and it's just amazing to be able to share this information with you from week to week. We hear the statistics sometimes that are quite daunting about how marriages are falling apart, but we also are aware that there are marriages that are doing well, very well, because they are willing to apply principles and to learn skills. So that's what we're here to do, skill building exercises, and we hope that you can stay with us and touch base with your friends and your family members and your spouse to ensure that they're watching or listening.
Well, we are going to be beginning the discussion right after we have a word of prayer. Join us if you're able to. Father, be with us. Grant us your wisdom, your peace, and your grace. We are sharing some very important principles today. We pray for your wisdom as we do so. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. So last week we spoke about finance, the whole matter of financial involvement and how that can be a source of conflict. We shared some useful tips, although we're going to go into details sometime later on. What we're doing this time around, we are identifying some sources of conflict. The list is not exhaustive.
No.
We are just giving a sample here. There are so many other areas, you can think, for example, change in lifespan can be a source of conflict. But let's get back to this. We want to talk about an area that can be very troubling because it can be very subtle as well, and that is addiction. There are individuals who have certain addictions, and they may not necessarily be diagnosed, but from the assessment, we can tell that it's an addiction. Addiction can be to drugs. When we talk about addictions, the first thing that people think about is drugs. But there are other areas. Work is an area that people can be addicted to. We use the term workaholic. You can be addicted to a particular behavior. You can be addicted to pornography. You can be addicted to, for that matter, you could be addicted to so many things. You could be addicted to sex. You could be addicted to eating.
Eating disorders.
I mean, I experienced a family at one time that was rather very interesting, though, and they functioned as a family only in the midst of severe conflict. So if something terrible isn't happening,
there's no family togetherness.
No family togetherness. I mean, that was a seriously dysfunctional family. But these are things that can, should I say, lead to certain behavior patterns that dependency, where I know that if I don't get this, I struggle, I can't live well. Just as a person may need some crack or cocaine because of previous encounter, individuals may think I can't do without sex, I can't do without eating chocolate or stuffing myself with something else.
Addictions are really interesting, and the research shows us that whether it's a chemical addiction or an addiction to some type of behavior, as you were mentioning, Doc, the process in the brain is exactly the same. All right, so it's the same pathway that's created in the brain that causes that type of almost reflex behavior every time a certain stimuli comes your way. And so, it's really important for us to understand that in a relationship, in a marriage, persons can come in with certain addictions. And as you mentioned, we're not talking about, because people would look out for drugs and say, I would never marry somebody like that. But your spouse can have an addiction to spending money. You can have an addiction to eating, pornography, sex, work, any of those can be significant addictions. And what we're saying is, at the end of the day, these can create conflicts in the relationship, because while you may be saying to the person, your spouse, why do you keep doing this? Why are you always overeating? And the person is saying, I can stop whenever I want to. Not realizing that it's an addiction that may need some additional assistance to get over. And so, wherever a person or wherever a couple can identify that type of challenge, it's always imperative to get some sort of assistance.
That's right. Now I want to delve deeper, and if we can take one or two of these situations that you mentioned, Doc. And let's start with the eating disorder, or the addictive pattern, where an individual, let's say the cake, chocolate, sugar, kind of thing.
Yes.
And one spouse is very health conscious.
Yes.
The other one is clearly addicted to, what it is, and we're saying sugary foods.
Yes.
And so this health conscious partner is thinking, this person is putting on weight. This person is going to get diabetes. This person is going to get sick, and I'm going to have to spend money, and we don't have a lot of money. And so they may think, hey, I need to tell you this behavior is wrong. No, there's a right and a wrong way approach to how we do that. Yes. But a lot of times people just say, use things, get mad at people and tell, you should be more responsible than that.
Right.
That's childish behavior. And that can create some tension.
Yeah, that's the point we were making. An addiction is just what it is. It's an addiction. And, to criticize somebody in that context may not always be very helpful, as opposed to trying to get help for the person. That's the point I'm making. And so, I just want to say, I think we need to really look at ourselves honestly to determine, look, am I struggling with something here?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you may have been struggling with something over and over again, and you're saying, I can do this, I can get beyond this, but you realize that you keep falling back into the same loop over and over again. For the sake of your marriage and for the benefit and the enjoyment or the happiness of your marriage, you may want to really seek some good counseling on this matter to be able to get beyond it.
I want to reinforce this point, because I think it is so very important. If your spouse says, I'm noticing a particular behavior pattern, it's a little disturbing to me. Are you sure you're okay in that area? And you're not, but you say, yes, I am.
I'm fine. Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yes.
It's okay. I just want to chill a little bit.
Right.
And because you feel that if you admit this particular weakness, your spouse may relate to you in a certain way that you think is negative. But when you fail to be honest, that self-consciousness, when you say, no, I don't have a problem, but deep down you're struggling with this problem, then you are denying yourself of an opportunity to get help. Because if I know that you have a serious problem, I can speak to you about getting help. But if you're admitting that you're in full control, then I may be tempted to think, well, then why are you acting so irresponsible?
Responsibly, right.
So the importance of being able to say, this is what is happening to me, it's a concern, and maybe we need to address it. That makes a difference.
Yeah. It takes a mature person, Doc, to be able to acknowledge that. And that's what we're praying for in the context of a marriage, that you would exercise that type of maturity, because remember that the result could be significant conflict in your relationship, or even the dismantling of your relationship, because you're not willing to take care of this thing. And let me just make the other point. The other point is that in our society we've come to the place where persons kind of think that if a person has an issue, that they're the worst thing since sliced bread. And I think, we need to move beyond that to appreciate that everybody has challenges in one way or another. Society tends to sort of categorize them and say, oh, yours is worse than mine, or, whatever the case is. And so people become very defensive about being able to talk to share. Some persons don't even want to talk about, to a professional about a situation they may be having, and they prefer to stay in that scenario and fall apart, as opposed to, taking the bull by the horns and just going and getting some assistance. And you'll discover very quickly that there are a lot of other people who probably are in a similar position to you as well.
And I'd like to say this to our listeners and viewers. Your spouse is one of the best persons for you to open up to. A lot of times we are afraid of how our spouses would react if we come clean. But experience has taught me, Doc, from the myriads of counseling experiences, that whenever a spouse is willing to humble himself or herself and say to his partner, this is my situation, that the response is generally one of care and compassion.
Right. Very true. Very true.
And try to say, let's work on this together.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch now to pornography.
Yes.
So a man is struggling, women do struggle with that as well. So, but just for all intents and purposes, a man is struggling with pornography. And he listens to this program and he says, well, Doctors Greene and Dr would say that I need to come clean and talk to my spouse about it. Right. And he goes to his spouse and he says, honey,
what's going on,
something is bothering me and I think I need to let you know what this is. Well, of course, your spouse may be shocked, especially if your spouse asked you some time ago and you said, no,
I'm good with that.
I'm good. That never bothers me, and so on. But even the initial shock will give way to, this is a concern. This can impact my marriage. So let's try to get some help on it. And that's the thing. Because if you don't, you're going to see how your marriage falls apart. Because there are some, you can be addicted to so many things, and all addictions have challenges, but there's some, I would like to say they're not all equal.
Right.
And pornography is one of those things that can lead you to a place of independence, may I say, where you probably have your spouse and don't have the need for your spouse, because you
satisfying that need elsewhere.
You're satisfying that need elsewhere, or you realize that your spouse isn't giving you the satisfaction from what you're getting on the screen. And that's dangerous, because what it is doing, it is eating away at the fabric of your marriage. So it's a good thing to come clean. And if for some reason or the other you don't think you can talk to your spouse, we like to talk about accountability partners. Some trusted person, responsible individual who you can say, I have a problem, I think it's destroying me, I need some help. That is important.
As you speak about that, Doc, I'm thinking in the context of pornography and where people may struggle, because we're talking about how conflict can arise, and your attitude towards your spouse. Maybe the kind of affection you show, the intimacy that you were accustomed to, and she begins to see a change in that, and she's beginning to wonder what's going on, and maybe a lack of interest in intimacy, sexual intimacy in particular, and it's creating conflict, because she may be making approaches to you, you are declining them or not showing much interest, and she now begins to get frustrated. That impacts other areas of her life. And so we're talking about how the conflict can arise out of, your addiction or your use of pornography. And along that journey, sometimes a person can be so withdrawn from the situation they don't even realize that they are the one who really is creating the tension because of their behavior. They may not realize their attitude or their approach has changed, but the wife or the spouse is saying, there's something not right here, what's going on? And so we're saying, look, again, and I really like how you spoke to that, the fact that the wife may be or the husband, whoever it is, understanding the situation can sometimes be so nurturing in the environment to say, hey, you know what, let's work on this together. Let's get some help. Let's go and get some counseling. You know what I mean? And see how we can push forward and salvage or restore our marriage. I think, that's important. And also a word to the spouse in a relationship where a challenge may be. It's really important, to recognize that something like this could happen to anybody, really, and being open to addressing it is probably the best way to go.
I mean, what we want are nurturing, caring units.
Yes.
You ought to feel or have a certain comfort level that you can approach your spouse and share a burden, a concern, a challenge. That's the idea.
Definitely. Well, Doc, I don't know if we can take the other one. The other area is that of affairs and how affairs also can create conflict in relationship. And when we're talking about affairs, well, we've over the months and years that we've had this program, we've spoken about affairs in two different arenas. So we talk about the physical affair,
yes,
but we also talk about the emotional affair. All right, and of course, affairs can obviously create conflict. This is probably one of the conflicts that we would say is probably bad in itself, as opposed to not being so bad in itself.
Yes.
But the context of an affair, when we look at it and the fact that it can cause a conflict, we spoke just a little while ago as we spoke about addictions, we were talking about the fact that a person's behavior and attitude in the relationship can change as a result of things that are distracting them. And in the context of an affair, there would obviously be a distraction, which may be the source of the conflict in the home, where one person is sensing that there's less interest now in the relationship than there was previously.
I want to share a principle, Doc. If you approach your marriage and look at your marriage as a sacred union, and you understand and appreciate the fact that the two of us, not the only thing that is supposed to be between us, is God.
Right.
I like to say that He's the glue that sticks the relationship together. And so you try to avoid other things. Now, occasionally, something gets into your eye. There is supposed to be a thin line of fluid between your eyeball and your eyelid. And when objects get in there, when something gets in there that interferes with it, it creates a real challenge.
Yes.
Anything that gets between you and your partner in that way creates a serious challenge. What you are seeking to do as we discuss conflicts is to understand and appreciate that you have a responsibility to keep out certain influences that can be damaging to your relationship. And when we talk about affair, this is one. This is one that comes in not as a real pain initially, because a man may see a young lady and she looks nice, she has the right curvature, and he's excited by her. And so in his mind, this is fun. And he lets her in. The challenge is, however, and I like how Proverbs put it, because Proverbs talks about how she walks down the road and, she's well perfumed and that kind of thing.
Fitting.
But when she comes in, it's a real disastrous situation that is developing there. And that's what the affair does. So we have a responsibility to, again, we're talking about boundaries. And so we have a responsibility to be true to our partner, to know that this is a space
that's sacred,
that is sacred, that is beyond, I would like to say, in the context of boundary, it's private space. And anybody that intrudes there is going to create a challenge.
So you also have, and as you mentioned that, you're talking about the private space, right? And any intruder in that space creates a challenge. So you also have scenarios where spouses have friends, workmates, and so forth, and one spouse may recognize that somebody isn't, one of your friends is not respecting the space, not respecting the boundary. We go out together and this friend will, get between us to come and hug you or to have a conversation with you as though I'm not there. Or, just sometimes you may see a certain type of interaction that makes you uncomfortable. And, I'm talking about in the context of protecting the space and avoiding or understanding where the conflict can come from. So I'm just thinking that it's important for each spouse to understand that conflict can be created if a person gets too close to your sacred little union there.
And it's interesting because you go to a function. The research tends to show that most affairs begin as work-related,
right?
Friends, right?
Yes.
So let's go to the office.
Yes.
And the office is having a function wherever you work, whether for whatever association, your office, your employment agency is having an affair, and they tell you
having an activity. Let's yes. They tell you that you can bring your spouse to this activity, and you go with your spouse, So you go with your spouse, but here is a work colleague who is, you go to eat, and here's a work colleague that is taking food to serve you when your spouse is there, And not to say that they're bringing for you and your spouse. Right, bring for you alone. Yeah.
And that should say something.
Yeah, yes.
Right? And your spouse is going to look at you.
Right.
Say, what's going on there? And you just say, we're just friends. And you don't see anything wrong with, and that can be conflict.
Right. And truthfully, there may be times when a person is maybe attempting to sort of, I'd say disrespect that space that you have. And as a spouse, you would have to address that, in that context. You'd have to say, well, I can't accept this because, my spouse also needs, and we're going to go and, in a way that, makes it very clear that this is a sacred little space. And the ability to, I think one thing that we always say, Doc, is that, whether you are here or you're away, the way that you conduct them yourself ought always to represent your marriage.
Correct.
Right? So because you're at work, you're not going to be freer and more open to interact with people at a certain level, because obviously that's going to create a problem when your spouse is in the vicinity, because the other persons may not be able to respect the space, since that's how you've always acted.
Correct.
So it's really important to realize that whether you're out or you're in, you always represent the space. You always represent your relationship. You always represent your marriage.
You ought to be faithful to your spouse. In fact, faithfulness counts more when your spouse is not present.
Is not present,
and that's very important. Yeah. So the fear, Doc, can be a very significant source of conflict. And even before the affair is found out, your behavior, and a fear will cause you to change your behavior.
Right.
That your spouse may not be aware that something is happening.
Wrong, yeah.
Your spouse only notices that there is a change in behavior.
Yes.
So you are staying out later than usual.
Yes. And
your spouse becomes uncomfortable with this. And they may not suspect anything, because you may have had a wonderful relationship before. But your spouse becomes concerned that you are coming home later. And you may excuse it by saying, you have overtime work to do. We had to work late.
Right.
But you chose to work late because you want to be there with somebody else.
Right.
So even without the affair being found out, an affair has the ability to create behavioral changes and interfere with what is supposed to be. Because I like to say, you're born with one heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't have two sweethearts. If you have two hearts, you're going to have a challenge. You know,
I like that.
It's difficult to service
I like
two
that.
hearts,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah. So very important. And you know, it's a journey. As I've said, you know, some persons may not really be aware that they may be placing themselves in a position that opens the door for that because of how they function and because of their personality. But I think, you know, once you're married, you have to begin to review some of your practices and your behaviors, right? Just to ensure that you're not placing yourself in a position that opens that door. And in the context of your relationship also, as you interact with your spouse, I think it's important, Doc, to always be aware of how you relate to each other, understanding that, so that if there's anything, any anomaly, anything that looks different, you can at least begin to relate to each other in a way that suggests that something isn't quite right here, and we need to be able to address this so that we don't end up, you know, in a worse situation. And so, you know, that conflict that arises out of changed behaviors and changed attitudes and so forth is a very good precursor, a very good warning sign, I should say, to addressing something that might be developing.
Yeah, so you ought to be able to listen to your spouse, but you must also understand your own emotions. You know, we're talking about emotional intelligence here.
Yes.
When you realize that you have certain desires that are not leading in the right path, because you're excited about going to this function because this other person is going to be there.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you are dressed in a particular way, you know, because you want this person to notice you.
Yes.
And I like to say, who do you talk about in your spare time, in your self-talk? What is on your mind? Are you reminiscing, imagining about this other person?
Wow, yeah.
You know, that should say something to you.
Yes.
If you're not married to that person, you are married but not to that person,
Right.
then those thoughts are dangerous.
Yeah.
They're wrong. You should not be harboring them.
Inappropriate. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the word. They're
Yes.
inappropriate.
Yeah. And you know, to be quite frank, in order to move beyond that, you may need some help.
Yes.
You know, because and we spoke about it, because sometimes, as you mentioned, Doc, not sometimes, most of the time, the affair never began as a physical affair. It always began as an emotional affair. And so if you're connected to somebody emotionally, that's something that needs to be addressed.
That's
so that
right.
you can avoid the conflict that is created in that context, yeah. And Doc, I need to say quickly, because
Yes,
you
go
know,
ahead.
couples need to, they really, you know, spending time talking is so important, and I think people just don't do it enough as couples. We're running here and there doing all kinds of things, but we never find time to talk. I think, you know,
because we
so
have
crucial.
cell phones and that kind of
That's
thing
right.
distracting us.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Very important indeed. Well, our time is up, unfortunately. We have to stop now. Please share your thoughts with us. Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That is Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That's all the time we have for today. But we will be back next week, same time. But until then, may God's blessings be yours. Blaine fell asleep.
Blaine? Blaine?
Yes, sir.
Oh, we're done.
He fell asleep. Okay.
All righty.